Hey, so today we're talking about presets once again, but I think you'll find this one interesting. We're talking specifically today about Eric Floberg's new 606 preset pack. If you don't know who Eric Floberg is, I gotta say that's kind of embarrassing for you. No, I'm completely kidding. If you don't know Eric's work, you should definitely check him out on YouTube and Instagram. He's an incredible creative based out of Chicago who I've been following for several years. And while we don't know each other personally, I feel like I've had at least some sort of digital connection with him. But his work has been so inspiring to me. And I'll just go off on a tangent here and say that people like Eric and other channels on YouTube are the reason that I became interested in wedding photography. And I really think are the reason that I'm able to support myself as a full-time creative artist right now, because I've fallen in love with weddings and also have a sustainable business because of that work. And that all came from the inspiration that I got from Eric's channel and other channels like his. I remember when I first started shooting, I had a mentor who basically told me, like, don't shoot weddings unless you just need the money. Basically made weddings seem like this thing I didn't want to do. And so for a long time, I told myself, oh, I don't want to do weddings. And it wasn't until I started watching Eric's channel that I realized, oh, wait, weddings seem kind of cool. And like, this guy's business is really admirable. And maybe there's something here. And I remember like summers just like binge watching Eric's channel, John Branch, other channels who really made wedding photography artistic and interesting and exciting. And I'm just so grateful for that. So now diving into the 606 preset pack. This pack is available at DVLOP.com. Eric created these with DVLOP. So if you saw my Nirav Patel preset pack review video, it's the same website that put out Nirav's preset pack. So they have their own Lightroom profiles that are incorporated with these presets. This pack runs $125 US, which is the going rate, I think, for presets of this quality, but it's still expensive for a digital good, I think. Not really saying that it's overpriced. You know, it is what it is. Presets can be expensive. I think $125 is an investment for sure. That's kind of why I'm making this video, because I want to help you determine for yourself if that investment is right for you. These presets won't be for everyone. They're a very specific look. So hopefully this video will help you determine if it's a yay or a nay. The other thing I will say is that buying this preset pack will not make you Eric Floberg. Your work won't look like his when you apply these presets because you're not him. So don't make that mistake. Yes, the editing style, I guess, will be similar, but it is a lot more than that. It depends on how you shoot, what you're shooting, and how you process the images after you apply the preset. So there's a lot of variables that go into this. So just know that right off the bat. You probably already do, but I'm just saying it again because I just have to say it again. So I'm not going to go through all the specs of these. Check them out on DVLOP.com. But basically, all you need to know is that this pack comes with 3 main presets, 2 color and 1 black and white. And then it has a series of tools that you can apply to further modify the presets. And we're going to dive right into Lightroom right now and show you what these look like. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom, and I have a series of images that I've selected from weddings and engagement sessions that I've shot over the past couple of years. Many of these I shot as a second shooter or associate shooter, and some of them are from my own clients and my own weddings. We have a good mix here, so hopefully this will give you a good idea of what these presets look like when applied to a variety of different situations. All of these, aside from some of the dancing photos, were shot with natural light, so keep that in mind. So we're going to start here. This is a wedding that I shot with my friend Sarah. I'm obsessed with this wedding. It was just incredible. Okay, so if we look over on the left-hand side here in the presets panel, we can see Eric Floberg 606. This is what you get when you purchase the preset pack. Here they are. So as I mentioned, we have 3 presets here: Ravenswood, Belmont, Montrose, and then we have a series of tools that we use to further modify the presets after applying the base. I really like this because in a lot of cases you buy preset packs and they give you so many options. I like that this is pretty limited. He describes Ravenswood as being like the go-to, Belmont's a little bit more vibey, and then Montrose is obviously the black and white variant. So for this one, we're going to start with Ravenswood. And you can see off the bat, it doesn't look too great. It looks kind of contrasty. It looks kind of muddy, but most of this can be fixed really easily just by raising the exposure. And it already looks so much better. It starts to look pretty amazing. So if we pull down the highlights here, they're getting just a little bit too bright. Maybe bring down the whites slightly. Let's go through these tools and see what they're doing here. So lower contrast, lift shadows, dynamic range, decrease highlights, soften greens, warm greens, remove purple cast, clean indoor lighting, and just a grain tool. So I know I'm going to apply grain tool, so I'm going to go ahead and click that. So we add a little grain here. Let's look at what remove purple cast is doing. I kind of like that here. What I've noticed with these presets is they do have a tendency to introduce a little bit of purple into the image, which I'm really not a fan of, especially with skin tone. Overall, this color here I feel is really nice, and I like it's timeless, it's interesting, it's colorful, beautiful. But applying this remove purple cast brings in a little more green. I think for this one, it can work. I don't think we need to do anything with contrast or dynamic range. We could if we wanted to. That's kind of a personal preference, but I think for this, we're gonna leave it as is. Here's a before, here's an after. So for the purposes of this video, we're gonna call this image good. So moving on to the next one, we're just gonna apply the settings from previous and see what happens. All right, so that looks way too bright. So we're gonna bring down the exposure, and that's probably gonna fix it. I think it's okay to bring down the highlights here. I'm gonna bring down the shadows as well. And I think that looks pretty nice. That's a before, that's an after. Let's reset this and just start over and see what happens. Actually, if I apply Ravenswood right off the bat, I think it looks better. Just applying Ravenswood. Here's a before, here's an after. We're gonna call that good. Love it. Okay, here's a landscape just to show you how this can be applied to landscapes. I mean, look at this, so beautiful. God, I love California. Okay, Ravenswood, let's see what happens. How about Belmont? I think for this, we'll go with Belmont. I am going to bring down the shadows slightly, bring down the highlights, bring down the whites. The color temperature that I shot this at was at 7300, which I think is a little bit too warm. I'm going to bring this down to 65 and see what happens. I think that feels better to me. And I'm also going to bring down the contrast. It just feels too contrasty. Great. Now I'm going to bring down the exposure. And maybe bring down the shadows. I think we'll call this good. That's a before. That's an after. Here's another gorgeous image from this wedding with the couple and this beautiful landscape. Let's go ahead and apply Ravenswood. And almost immediately it looks pretty incredible. I'm gonna add some grain here. The only thing that I might do is bring up the shadows slightly and maybe bring down the whites, but I think this looks absolutely gorgeous. Here's a before, here's an after. Just so beautiful, looks great. Here's a little bit darker of an image. Let's try Belmont for this one. And I'm gonna bring up the exposure. You can see just applying the preset right here makes it feel kind of muddy, but that's mostly because this image is a little bit underexposed. So we can fix that by bringing up the exposure, which it already makes it look beautiful. It's way too warm, I think. So I'm gonna bring down the white balance, make it a little bit cooler. Okay, so we'll add some grain. I'm gonna add the dynamic range, which I think looks nice. I might bring down the overall exposure, and then now I'm gonna say remove purple cast. Can you see what that's doing? Here's the image originally, here's the image after purple cast removal. Original, remove purple cast. I'm gonna go ahead and click that, and I think that's really nice. Here's a before, here's an after. Again, looks pretty incredible. Love this. Here's an image of the reception venue at this property, which was this barn with these beautiful lights and the moon. It was so picturesque. I'm just, again, like obsessed with this day. It was so beautiful. For this one, I'm going to apply Belmont. I'm going to bring up the exposure. Maybe bring down the highlights slightly. I think we're going to call this good. Okay, and here's one dancing shot from that night. So for this one, we're going to apply let's apply Ravenswood for this. Again, not looking great here, but we're going to fix that by bringing up the exposure, which already makes it feel so much better. We're going to bring down the highlights because I was shooting with flash here, so her face is quite a bit brighter than everything else. Maybe a little bit warm for me. I might bring down the exposure. Let's see what happens if we add dynamic range. Yeah, we're going to definitely do that for this one. Bring down the overall exposure. And we might lower the contrast. Yeah, I think we can lower the contrast as well. And this image was shot at 100 ISO, so let's also add some grain. Yeah, I think that looks pretty nice. Here's a before. There's an after. Here's another wedding that I second shot for a different Sarah. This image was shot with a tilt shift lens, which is also a trick that I learned from Eric FLOBERG. Thank you, Eric. Again, this video is all about Eric today. So for this one, I'm going to apply Ravenswood. I'm going to bring up the exposure and bring down the highlights. And we're going to call this great. That's a before. That's an after. So this image is from a together session that I shot in Santa Barbara a few months ago. Also shot with the tilt shift lens. It's a 45mm tilt shift. For this one, we're going to apply Ravenswood. Actually, we're going to apply Belmont. I'm going to lower the contrast. I'm going to add grain. And I think that's it. I think this looks pretty nice. Might bring down the highlights slightly. Might cool this off slightly. That's a before. That's an after. Another image from the same session. For this one, we're also going to apply Belmont. And I think right off the bat, that looks pretty great. You can really tell what it does to the greens and the yellows here. Here's a before. Here's an after. I might just add some grain. And we're going to call this good. Okay, here's another image from a different wedding that I shot with my friend Sarah. For this one, we're going to apply Montrose and show you what the black and white looks like. Right off the bat, that looks pretty good. I'm going to add some grain. For black and white images, I like a lot of grain, so I'm going to actually increase the grain here to maybe like 45. So you can see we got lots of nice grain here. Let's see if we can add any of these tools, if they're doing anything for us. Maybe lift dynamic range. And I think that's probably it. I might try to bring down the highlights a little bit more. Bring down the whites a little bit more. Bring down the shadows. That's a before. That's an after. Looks pretty good. Another image from the same wedding. We're going to apply Ravenswood for this. I'm going to bring up the exposure. We're going to say dynamic range for this. So I might bring the exposure back now. And it's a little bit warm. Bring down the white balance slightly. Maybe bring down the shadows slightly. And we're also going to say remove purple cast. Yeah. Let's do that. And I think this looks really nice. Another image from this wedding. Let's apply Belmont. Let's bring down the overall exposure. And I think that looks pretty great. We'll just apply some grain. Here's a before. Here's an after. Looks really cool. For this one, we're going to say previous and apply the same settings from the last photo we just edited. That looks not great. So let's bring the exposure back. Maybe bring the exposure up. And I'm going to warm it up a little bit. That looks good. Let's see if we can do anything with the greens here. I'm not seeing a ton of difference. I might bring down the shadows and bring down the blacks and lower the overall contrast. Here's a before. Here's an after. I think that looks pretty cool. Here's an image from an elopement I shot at the courthouse, just to show you how these apply to florals. We'll apply Ravenswood here. I'll bring up the exposure, bring down the highlights, bring down the whites. Let's cool this off slightly. Here's a before. Here's an after. Looks pretty good. Here's an image from later on that day where we went to the beach with an outfit change. For this one, we're going to apply Belmont. And we're going to bring up the exposure and bring down the highlights and the whites. We might just say dynamic range. That's a little bit too much. I am going to say lower contrast. And I'm also going to remove purple cast. You can see what that's doing. I'm also going to add grain. Here's a before. Here's an after. I think that looks pretty awesome. Here's another landscape image that I shot out in Goleta. I'm going to apply Ravenswood to this. We're going to bring up the exposure. Maybe warm it up slightly. bring down the highlights, bring down the whites. Here's a before, here's an after. Here's another one from an elopement I shot with my friend Sarah. I'm gonna apply Belmont to this and bring up the exposure. And almost immediately it looks pretty awesome. I'm gonna apply some grain. For this one, I would probably do a little bit more retouching just to even out skin tones. But for the purposes of this video, we'll call this good. Here's a before, here's an after. Here's another image from a wedding where I second shot. And for this one, we're gonna apply Montrose and we're gonna add some grain. I'll bring down the highlights, bring down the whites. I think that looks pretty cool. Before, after. Here's another image from that same wedding. For this one, we're gonna apply Belmont. I'm gonna bring up the overall exposure. I'm gonna bring down the whites, maybe bring up the shadows even more. We'll actually click the dynamic range action. I'm not sure if you can see it, but I can see a lot of purple here. And so I'm gonna see what happens if I say remove purple cast. Yeah, I think that helps quite a bit. I might bring down the black slightly, and I might make this a little bit warmer. Here's a before, there's an after, very cool. Here's an image from an engagement session that I shot recently. For this one, we're gonna apply Belmont, bring down the exposure, bring down the highlights and the whites. Obviously, there's a lot of information here in the middle of the image that's been clipped, but it's sort of a vibey, interesting image. I got this really unique lens flaring. This is created by adding a 2 to 5 stop ND filter on my RF50 1.2. And when the sun hits it just right, it creates this really interesting ring, which I just think is so cool. So that's kind of what this one is, just to get this ring, but you have to shoot right into the sun. So it's kind of challenging, but really interesting nonetheless. So here's a before, here's an after. Here's an image from an elopement that I shot recently. For this one, we'll apply Ravenswood. And again, almost immediately it looks pretty awesome. Might just bring up the overall exposure before, after. Oh, I love that. All right, so that wraps up my little tutorial in Lightroom for you on these presets. As you can tell, I like them quite a bit. Hopefully from this video, you've seen enough examples where you can sort of determine for yourself if these are presets that will be useful to you, depending on the way that you shoot, what you shoot, the colors that you're drawn to. They do have a specific look and feel, so you should really decide for yourself, like if you think they will benefit you. For me, I really like them. I think they're pretty clean across a variety of images. I like the simplicity of just having 3 of them. The black and white preset looks great, but the 2 color ones also are really interesting. If there were anything that I would say that I don't love about these presets, it would be the cost, but that, you know, is just, it's a factor, right? It's an investment. We know that going in, so I can't complain too much about that. The other thing is that I do find in some situations, in some images, when I applied the presets, there was a lot of magenta in the skin tones, which I had to work a little bit to remove. But he does give you that remove purple cast preset, so that helps quite a bit. And these are not presets that take a lot of work to make them look good. It's one of my criteria for presets that are actually worth it, is that you apply them and they look good right off the bat, and you only have to make minor adjustments to make them look perfect. As you saw in this video, in most cases, it was just exposure needed to be raised in order to make these look really great. So in that sense, this preset pack ticks all the boxes. They're beautiful, timeless, they don't look over edited, they're easy to tweak to make look good, they're not overwhelming to use. So for me, for weddings, couples, these are great, and I would definitely recommend them. Okay, so now it's your turn to let me know what you think. Leave a comment down below. Tell me something that I missed. Tell me your experience. I'm genuinely curious. Let's get a conversation going in the comments. If you have questions about these, questions about presets in general, please leave them down below for me to answer. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. That really helps. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. I'd love to see you at the next video. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye. Love is free.